If you've been watching on Facebook, you'd have seen my footage from the march so far in London here at the Human Rights March, taking place beginning from Hyde Park at 1 o'clock today. Now we're walking through Camden Town. Lots of people here walking by, taking in the activity as we make our way through the streets of Camden. So the march has actually been really well received by the public. There's been lots of people taking photos, lots of people live streaming, lots of flyers being taken by the public as we speak about the issues in the United Kingdom. So we're broadcasting now. We've got the signal to broadcast on multiple channels. So if you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter, we broadcast multiple times today on Facebook. You better see the rest of our footage from earlier today over there. But now in Camden Town, here today for the Human Rights Rally. Really this is beyond the Human Rights Bill, which is, if you're not aware, the Human Rights Act reform seeks to replace the Human Rights Act in the UK, which has served Britain well for the last 20 years, with a Bill of Rights, which essentially strips the rights from the people and gives that power to the government and the authorities, and creates a load of grey areas and fine lines that makes it very difficult for people to stand up for their rights. But more broadly here, tackling government overreach, because history has shown us, and it's playing out right now, is when there's conflict or a crisis, and we've seen both in the last 2 years with COVID and then Ukraine and Russia, governments and authorities often use this opportunity to galvanize and to consolidate their powers, and we're witnessing this now in abundance in the UK. So in fact today we're now operating under the new police bill powers when it comes to the right to protest. They came into effect on the 28th of June. The bill itself, the police bill, came into effect early this year, but now the police powers are in effect. So I did a live on that this week, where you can see how the right to protest is significantly under threat. But the Human Rights Act, this new bill that's coming forth, is one of the primary reasons we're here today. But if you actually look at some of the legislation coming down the track in the UK, there's numerous bills that in many ways impact and start to reduce our human rights. Everything from home education. There's new bills that give greater power to the pharmaceutical and medical industries for experimental drugs and genetic modification. We've got the online safety bill, which threatens the right to free speech and free expression online. There's a whole raft of bills that fundamentally alter our rights and freedoms in the United Kingdom, and this represents a slow erosion of the free, open and democratic society that we've become accustomed to. And I say that lightly because, well, I say that strongly and lightly at the same time. I say it strongly in the sense that this is a very real issue, and that we've got to stand up and tackle these issues as they emerge through these bills. It feels like in the wake of COVID-19, the government are testing the boundaries. Well, they're not testing it, they're pushing the boundaries. It's not a test. They are pushing the boundaries. They're opportunistically pushing forward with this power grab, and it is fair to call it a power grab. That is a reasonable assertion. But my point around taking it lightly is because even the idea of a free, open and democratic society in the United Kingdom, we have somewhat of an illusory democracy in the UK. You know, we do have, you know, the standard voting procedures, but actually the system in the UK right now, most would agree, is not representing the interests of the people. If people have an issue that they feel strongly about, getting that through to the MPs that's supposed to represent them is incredibly hard. So we almost have this illusory democracy here. Don't get me wrong, in terms of relative to other parts of the world that are living under dictatorships or autocracies, yes, we're much further ahead. But that's no reason to allow standards to slide in this country, which is what is happening under the current government in the wake of COVID and the conflict in Ukraine. And of course, more broadly, even further again, looking at some of the issues that the United Kingdom is facing, the food crisis, the inflation, cost of living, a lot of these things are political decisions. There was a post yesterday put forward by, I think it was the United Nations or the World Economic Forum, talking about how Russia had, or Putin had, caused this food insecurity in the West. And whilst I don't condone the actions of Putin, and this is not the subject of today's broadcast whatsoever, I can comment on that another time, but the reality is Western sanctions and Western decisions by our governments, our leaders in Europe, is what's fundamentally caused the food shortages. And the cost of living crisis is generally put down to the inflationary pressures that people are facing. And of course, those inflationary pressures are coming from the price of, primarily from three sources: the price of food, the price of utilities, energy, and the price of petrol, fuel. All three sectors, by the way, are making record profits in the last couple of years. So, whilst the citizens are worried about being asked to become more productive in order to increase the output of the nation and to create the opportunity for increased wages, the reality is that the very organisations, the companies that are causing the cost of living crisis are profiting at grand levels. That's a political decision. The price rise is coming up in October once again, where people are literally, in my lifetime I've never seen people taking pictures of their electric meter and posting them online. It's a rather mundane subject, but it's become an enigmatic viral sensation because people's bills are so insane, and they're going to go up again later in the year. This is a political decision. So today's march is more than the Human Rights Act challenging the good support from the people at the bar over there. This is looking at the overall government overreach in terms of its intervention and its imposition into our lives, but also its inaction against corporate interests that have become dominant in public life and within politics. And as I mentioned in my opening broadcast today, where I spoke about we've got this polarity of huge corporations and under this kind of idea of stakeholder capitalism, huge corporations and central bodies having a massive influence over public life, over politics, over governments, over our economies. Yet at the same time, we're seeing the lowest levels of political engagement, which is why when there's a human rights march in London, the capital city in England, there are only thousands of people here rather than hundreds of thousands or millions, because people are so disenfranchised, so disengaged from the process that it's like we're starting over. It's the process about and getting the message that these various bills are coming up and that the governments are reaching and overstretching into our lives and they're failing to take action on the things that are important for everyday citizens. People are starting to see it, and that's how this is why protests are an important vessel, because in an ideal world, as I've said many times before on protests and earlier today, in an ideal world, a protest would lead to a political change, but directly, but it's part of a process. Protests are effective in raising awareness to the public of issues that are present. Yeah, I don't know. Police officers just stopped that guy. I don't know what's going on. So raising awareness to the public, but also sending a message to the governments that there is a resistance, that put it on their radar, put it onto the members of parliament, ministers, other government departments, that there is people out there who are unhappy, and ultimately we must remember that the government serve the people, and if we can raise enough awareness, then we can put significant pressure on the government. Now, the challenge in this particular incident, as I've talked about many times before and today, is that people tend to act when they feel it personally. They feel a sense of urgency. Now, there is a sense of urgency in the next couple of months because these bills are coming forward, and as I've mentioned, the police bill has already passed, and that is the beginning of a slow erosion of rights and freedoms in the United Kingdom. And we leave it too late, bill by bill, we'll see very slowly that our government and the central authorities have amassed a great deal of power, and when it comes to challenging that power, we have very little tools at our fingertips to make a change. Because when you take away the right to protest and the right to speak freely online and the right to speak freely in public, then you're taking away some of the bedrocks of democracy and the foundations of a free and open society. And that's the realistic prospect that we're facing right now. We've already seen the challenges in the protest bill, and it only came into effect on the 28th of June, so we haven't had any of those landmark court cases and, you know, imprisonments that will likely follow from those who have the courage to go ahead and create movements and lead protests. We haven't seen yet the people that will succumb to the hefty fines that will come with the online safety bill, but they will come if we allow them. This is a contract, it's a transaction, and at the moment the government is contracting over us and transacting without our consent, or it's an implicit consent that comes by virtue of the fact that participation and engagement is so low that the governments get away with it and it passes. So whilst that may not sound very optimistic, I feel very optimistic, as always, coming to a protest and a march like this, that it's always those brave, courageous few that are willing to stand up in the beginning to build a movement, and when that movement grows and people are willing to take action in whatever form, whether that's protesting, campaigning, writing to MPs, whilst, you know, some of these efforts may seem futile, ultimately it's a game of influence, it's a game of communication, and it's our ability to galvanize in masses and communicate effectively that ultimately wins the day against much greater powers. And we have to remember, as I said, that we the people are the ones that put the people into power, and therefore we've got to make it clear, abundantly clear, what our demands are. And in this case, we've got to take a strong stand for human rights. We've got to resist the rights bill that's coming up, seek amendments to ensure that rights are protected, and the various other bills that are coming forth. And it's not to say that every bill that comes forward into Parliament is innately flawed. That would be overly simplistic. You know, within most of these bills there are useful pieces of legislation. So it's about making the amendments and making sure the pieces that are most damaging are removed and replaced by more empowering pieces of legislation that uphold the values of what should be a free, open, peaceful, democratic Great Britain. Putting the great back into Britain that way. You know? Right now, it's just Britain, that's for sure. And it's barely that, you know? Look at the last 2 years. Devolved nations, working in isolation. So much for Great Britain. Contentious stuff, eh? So, we're now just marching through Camden. Final destination is Hampstead Heath, I think, where there's going to be an empowerment fair, I understand, with different organisations that are coming to represent different solutions that can look at the creative elements of creating change beyond the political elements that we're here focused on for the march. So, wanted to keep you updated. It's an important issue that we're facing here right now in the UK. Some of the best resources that you can find on the Human Rights Bill in particular, you can find at Liberty Human Rights, Amnesty International, and Save Our Rights UK. At the moment, Elevate, my organisation, is in the process of creating new content on these issues, and over time we hope to be able to produce some graphics and infographics that can help disseminate information about the key changes that are being put forth by the government, so people can get clarity on what's happening and what needs to change. And it's our hope that by showcasing the protest here today, that the next time there's a march or a rally or an event that is about human rights, that people will be inspired to come along. You'll have seen that it's a very peaceful, happy, joyful process, procession. People here from all ages, all backgrounds. It's a real kind of family event. A little drummer there.
You kind of sort of think, nah.
So that hopefully you feel inspired to become engaged and get involved in the process. And in terms of our ideals at Elevate, we want to create an opportunity for people to get involved in different ways, whether that's disseminating content, creating content, helping to organize events. You know, there's an abundant number of ways that people can get involved. If you're a writer, for instance, you're someone who's naturally skilled at building new relationships and building networks. You know, everyone has a role to play if you're inspired by the cause. So the challenge here is that human rights affect all of us. They ought to be the bedrock of a free and open society. Therefore, there is incentive for the majority of the population to have a view. So part of our challenge is now getting the message out there and getting people engaged. And as I mentioned, today is one vessel for doing that. Content's another, but it's down to all of us to have conversations. You know, there's in our communities and our families, just to talk about these issues and just see how people feel about these things and see what their awareness levels are, because awareness is the first step to change. We can create awareness in a really peaceful, harmonious way. The human rights issues are far less contentious than the COVID stories that we've seen over the last couple of years. As is things like freedom of speech, although it's still politicized and tribalized and polarized. But there are ways for us to cut through that, and hopefully living by example through these types of peaceful events. That's one way to break through some of that polarization. So I'm going to take a break again now. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you'll share this video. I'll be back again later on. I don't think we're too far from our destination. At the end of the march, I'll give my kind of debrief. But it's been a really, as always, it's been a really, really powerful day. And I hope that those of you at home will find a way to get involved and join us next time. But for now, the best way you can help the cause is by hitting the share button, commenting, pressing the like button. Let's get some views, let's get some traction, let's get the word out that this government, through a series of bills this summer, is putting our human rights and freedoms further under threat, and it's going to take our actions to create change, and the power is in our hands. So I'll say peace out for now. If you haven't already joined our community, our change-making community, head over to weareelevate.org. That's weareelevate.org. Join our community, where you can join the conversation and exchange ideas about how we can create positive change in the world so that we can ensure a brighter future, not only for us, but for future generations to come. All right, peace and love. Thanks.